Welcome to This Week in Cannabis Live. I am Jay Rosenthal. Nope. That is Jeremy Berke. That is Marc Hauser. And that is AnnaRae Grabstein. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I like this Friday time we spend together.
Me too.
Me too.
It's not bad.
It's like a pre-Shabbat check-in in some ways.
Check-in, yes. For those keeping track, it's actually the week of Purim. Purim was earlier this week and Passover a couple weeks hence. So I might be doing this from warmer climates in the coming weeks, heading down to Florida for part of Passover with the family. Nobody needs to know that except you three.
Down in Boca Vista?
Boca, basically, the fountains in Lake Worth, Florida, which is, for those in the know, that's like one of the original places where Bubbies and Zadie's went. And the Bubbies and Zadie's mostly came from New York, which is a good segue to our first thing I want to talk about, which is last week we talked about the new, interim executive director or CEO of the OCM. This week he had his first meeting. John Kagia said something awesome during the meeting, talking about it was could be a $4.6 billion market in New York by 2028. But in the context of, he said, we were hoping we'd be at the $3 billion mark by the end of the day. He was talking about the actual meeting, which I think was March 5th. But we're a few pennies short. Somebody please go buy something today to help us hit that number, which I think is a great thing for him to say. The OCM executive director wants more people to buy more weed. That seems to be a good sign in the industry. $4.6 billion market would make it massive if New York got there. Jerry, you watched some, read some. What is your takeaway about Kagia's first meeting in charge?
Yeah, I did. I did watch the meeting. John's always been a very smart guy. I've said that on the show before. As I previously covered New York OCM and Cannabis Control Board meetings, John's sort of presentation about market size, market dynamics was always the most interesting thing to me. And I think it's no surprise that was the biggest takeaway of his first discussion in this role, right? And so, he gave us some pretty bullish growth numbers. I think, 4.6 billion, like you said, Jay, that would actually put it larger than California's market in 2025. And so, I think the point stands is that the, locus of the cannabis world is shifting east. John's in charge, and I think that's a good thing. And also, I think it's no surprise that a lot of industry leaders, industry executives from the private sector have come out in support of John over the past few weeks. Even people like Curaleaf's CEO and founder Boris Jordan has spoken in support of John. A number of attorneys and investors that are all in our networks have spoken in support of John. So look, I think it's good. I think it's bullish, and I think I'm excited to see where he takes the agency moving forward.
AnnaRae, being bigger than California, does that ruffle feathers out there?
No, it's been my prediction all along.
Yeah.
I think that when I look at the dollars and cents, at the population, at the stores, it's has seemed to be that New York should be able to be a $4 billion market unquestionably, and 4.6 sounds good to me. And I hope to see more markets that are joining the party and doing better than California.
Yeah. Does that surprise you, Marc, that it's going to be that big, or at some point as soon as they open enough stores?
No, it doesn't surprise me one bit either. I don't know that I fully agree with that it will be, that it's going to become the locus of cannabis, in that, I think it will, it may be for companies and brands and sales, but, I think that it will be a long time before California loses the more sort of the intangible, sort of just being sort of the heart of high quality, cannabis. That's hard to replicate. That's hard to pull that kind of branding away.
Mm-hmm.
The difference when you compare kind of what New York and California have had to overcome in terms of transition to legal markets.
True.
The overcoming for California has been about unlicensed cultivation, and in New York, it's been broadly about unlicensed retail. Basically, it's that, and I think that which one is harder to end, and maybe has had less humans or economic impact. And I think that ultimately it's going to be easier for New York to create a retail environment that serves consumers than it is for California to figure out a way to completely shut down its illicit production. And those are really that's like the biggest driver of the failure to launch, or the challenges that California has, is just how much cannabis is grown here that that does not end up in the legal stores and gets to people in all kinds of other ways.
Well, it gets to people in bodegas in New York too, so it's not, they're not unrelated. I would say it's just easier I guess it's easier to crack down on bodegas than it is to crack down on massive greenhouses in California. Can I shift to? I think that's a good. Go ahead, Mark.
I'm sorry, just before we jump, I just, on a related note, when AnnaRae just was talking about, there was an interesting panel or sort of presentation yesterday by the Berkeley, I'm going to mess up the name here, the Berkeley Cannabis Research Center, which is an academic, sociological, economic, and I guess geographic sort of center set up that's backed by the state. And they presented yesterday a really interesting paper after years of study about what drives illicit, unlicensed cultivation and what helps mitigate it. And their conclusions are expanding access to licenses, which was an interesting, it is worth, and they back it up. They back it up with numbers, with studies. It's worth sort of pulling, digging that up. I recommend that to our listeners here, or watchers.
We will link to it in the comments in the show notes. If I may take a quick segue into what we released this week with our partners at Little Alerts, which is this month's, or I guess last month's, New York brand power rankings. And it's hard to see here, I realize, because it shows the top 50. But I will direct you to the top left, the top 10. The brands are the same. There's slight movement within. But I actually want to direct you to number 13 and 14, which are Wild and Gruen, which are now the same company, moving up both 3 spots. So, and a lot of the movement sort of on the tail end of the 50 as well. Sort of the yellow ones are new, green ones moving up, red ones moving down. But Gruen and Wild caught my eye. They both moved up, some of the biggest movers of the month, and they're moving together, which I don't know if it's coincidence, good operations, or a real dedicated look at the market. But I would not be surprised to see them crack the top 10 either together or separately in coming months. This has been fun to track, and I think we're getting interesting sort of feedback from the market on this. Does that surprise you that Gruen and Wild are moving together up this chart, AnnaRae?
No, I think what's more interesting is that this chart represents an integrated brand list of multiple form factors, and edibles are a smaller portion of the market generally, but are really growing at a faster rate than other form factors, in particular, like seeing just a systemic decline of flower over time. And so it's not just Wild and Gruen, but right above them is Camino, which is another edible brand. And for an edible brand at all to be in a top 10 that is a multi-category list just shows how consumer behaviors and preferences are shifting to more non-inhalables. And that is something that I think is going to continue to be a trend that we see, which would mean that flower-only companies might start to see their rankings degrade, while edibles and other non-inhalables and more simple form factors will continue to be more popular.
And Mark, that would suggest good for the industry overall, I would imagine, in terms of brand building, but also relative profit per product. No?
Well, I think that it's, it isn't that terribly surprising. I mean, you've got, because it wouldn't be surprising because it is a little easier to build brands with the edibles. Just because there's, it's easier to sort of replicate the product, across the country, and you've got fewer SKUs to promote. I wonder if any of that is driven by the New York numbers. That fact is driven by the fact that and again, I don't know this for sure, but it might be a little harder to smoke in an apartment building, in a large apartment building. A lot of apartment buildings might have prohibitions on that. I don't know if that's true, but maybe that might be what makes it what makes that form factor a little more attractive, that being edibles in New York versus others.
Well,
they do.
Jeremy's our resident expert on smoking.
I have a consumer perspective on this. One is that New York has legalized smoking cannabis anywhere you can smoke cigarettes, right? And so that means street corners, anywhere you can do it on the stoop. And so look, like, yes, while it's true that apartments have bans, it's like you can sort of just step outside and do it. I do think that is part of it. I think the bigger reason is that, for those who like flower, like rolling their own, it's becoming more of a craft thing, right? In the same way that craft beer is. And so I think in New York, you still have pretty robust networks of illicit, non-storefront flower sellers. And so the people that prefer that are probably just using that, right? It's less tax, it's less expensive. They're going through that channel. Whereas, the average person that goes into a dispensary, maybe once a week or once a month, however they do their shopping, that is more likely to be a consumer with a little bit more discretionary income and the ability to buy edibles, beverages, those form factors that are sort of like one step removed down the chain of flower. So, Mark, yeah, I think it's both. I think it's, one is that people live in apartments. Two, it's just that the average dispensary consumer is probably getting funneled into these sort of more expensive per dose of THC, and also culturally a different product than rolling a blunt on a stoop.
Also, weather in New York in February.
Weather, yeah.
But this brings up something I didn't need to share. But Meghan McCain. Did I add this? Hold on. Remove. Add. She tweeted this week, "I would never have supported the legalization of marijuana had I known what would end up happening to young people in our cities. I deeply regret every major city and Uber in them just reeks of weed everywhere. It's absolutely vile." Do we care what Meghan McCain thinks about things?
Not really.
I want to say is bless New York for allowing people to smoke cannabis where they can smoke cigarettes. I personally feel absolutely the opposite of Meghan McCain, and I love smelling cannabis as I walk in New York. It brings me extreme joy, and I am not the only one. So I'm just going to say, let's not let her take all the oxygen out of the room. How many of you guys like the smell of weed when you walk down the street? Yeah,
I mean, look, there is the smell is the one thing. Like, it is just a general. It's a nuisance for a lot of people, and it's sort of the argument that the anti-cannabis side has been focusing on because their other arguments don't really hold up under statistical scrutiny, right? And so they look at this; it's a quality of life issue, and it's an easy way to for Meghan to get a lot of engagement on Twitter, which is her career. And so, so two things. One is that I think New York made the decision to allow smoking cannabis anywhere you can smoke cigarettes purely because it's an enforcement issue, right? It wasn't necessarily a quality of life thing. They just said, look, like, if we are going to legalize cannabis, we cannot, arrest everyone for smoking on every single block in New York. And so there is that mechanism where, no matter how many people in New York don't like it, it's never going to be enforced. There's a lot of things that people don't like about what other people do in New York City that will never go enforced. And this is maybe one of them. But two, I think in other states, it may be incumbent upon the industry and consumers to sort of, fix those problems and put a good foot forward. And I don't mean that just by personal behavior. I just mean in states where you're more, driving around, et cetera, where, maybe consumption lounges, there's a policy carve out for consumption lounges. Like, maybe it does make sense to rein in consuming in public. Like, drinking in public is still not allowed. So all that is to say, I'm on both sides of the fence there. I do think that, given the state of American politics and the state of cannabis politics in America, there are certain things that maybe we should be a little bit careful about. And I think the smell of weed in public is just now becoming one of them, rightfully or wrongfully. But it is becoming a flashpoint.
Yeah.
Well, and you also have, there has been this trend lately, and to me, I see it sort of as her tweet is just another example of this, of a little bit more of conservative backlash against legalization.
Totally.
We just saw this earlier this week in the article in the Journal about teen, high school use, and school use, even though, the article admits that the statistics show that use among children, minors has gone down and continues to drop. But, but they, of course, the article is a handful of stories, individual stories of kids, doing dumb stuff at high school, which they're not supposed to. And so, so it's sort of like, yeah, we recognize the statistics, but we don't care because it's still bad, And so I think that we can't, it's easy to be dismissive. I think, Jeremy, to your point is that it's easy to be dismissive, but we need to be, as we try to legitimize the product, we need to at least be acknowledging and respectful that there are, two sides of this coin.
I agree.
Yes, I agree.
I want to talk trends a bit, Mark. You sort of brought it up about trends and use, of course, but where maybe one of the more mature and certainly nationwide markets here in Canada, where one, in Ontario, you can smoke wherever you can smoke cigarettes. Jeremy, you can do the same thing here. So whether you are in New York or just north of the border in Ontario, you can do the same thing. Just don't bring it across the border. That's just a word of warning. Either way, bad idea. Buy it here, buy it there, but don't go from one to the other. But there were stats this week about alcohol and cannabis sales in Canada. Alcohol sales are down 4.2% nationwide, and cannabis sales are up 11.5% nationwide. Now, alcohol still accounts for sort of 5 or 6 times as much, but if you had to be on one of those trends, you'd rather be on cannabis trend than alcohol trend. And this is where I think, to your point last week, AnnaRae, alcohol and beverage companies are looking at these two very rudimentary charts to say we need to make up ground. Is this concerning to them, or is this why they're taking action, or how does this impact sort of what they're thinking from your experience last week in Miami?
I didn't think there was anything new about this. This is just more of what's been going on, and I don't think it's correlated. The Brewers Association put out an interesting piece, and they really broke down a bunch of data where they were showing that while beer is declining, it's not because people are turning to cannabis. And so I think it's just generally there are new consumer behaviors, and alcohol is paying attention, just like all packaged goods and venture capitalists and investors are paying attention, because the most important thing is to pay attention to consumer signals. And consumer signals continue over time to show us over the past decade that people are interested in cannabis. They want to explore it. And there's more and more consumers who continue to become a new user all the time as innovation brings us new product categories and brands are repositioning themselves in new ways. And Canada is continuing to innovate in new ways of like bringing products and brands more forward in ways that it was much more restrictive earlier on in the market. And so because of that kind of loosening of certain elements of the market, I think it makes a lot of sense that it continues to grow and that they hadn't yet captured everyone that was interested in the category.
I will also say in Ontario and most of Canada, booze is very expensive relative to cannabis too. So while it may not be correlated, there's an economic component to this as well, where cannabis is much more economical, to be quite honest, even though it's relatively expensive here to other places. But alcohol is brutal here. Like it's just very, very expensive in Ontario.
The data did remind me that the entire national cannabis market in Canada is sort of the size of a good state in the US. It reinforced that for me. I hadn't seen that total number.
Canada is about the size of a big state. So
by population. What was it? 2.5 billion or something like that?
Yeah, 2.5 billion. Yeah. About 40 million people. We punch way above our weight class in hockey talent, I will say, and actually basketball talent too. So
basketball talent.
Definitely. Traded cannabis companies, sir. Profitability in some of those companies. Our largest retailer here has cannabis retailer has 220 stores. They just announced that this week. They opened their 220th store, Canna Cabana High Tide. So imagine one retailer having 220 stores in California, basically. Like they'd be super popular on the realm, and they are popular here. But it's a very big footprint for High Tide. Just sort of footnote to sort of all of that. Mark?
No, I just made a poutine joke, so that's all I had.
Well, there's actually poutine news this week. Do you know this? That squeaky
No,
cheese,
but you're welcome for the segue.
Cheese curds in Quebec are trying to get their own geographical indicator. So like Champagne or Bordeaux, they're trying to get Quebec's squeaky cheese, basically cheese curds, so that if you want to make proper poutine, and that poutine is way on the rise in other places, including the US, if you want to call it poutine and you want to use actual poutine cheese, it has to come from Quebec, and they want to sort of
I love all my French Canadian friends, but this just seems like another Quebec rent-seeking classification, like maple syrup and the entire province. But I digress. I do love poutine.
Bring it back to cannabis. This is really the discussion around appellations, and wine proved it as a value. And in California, we actually have a cannabis appellations program that is in the law and is regulated by the Department of Cannabis Control in order to be able to do the same thing, and to say if you're going to put Humboldt on the label, that this is what has to be from Humboldt, and this is what counts as from Humboldt, etc.
One small note on this, because Jeremy's making fun of it. There actually is a strategic maple syrup reserve in Quebec, and it actually got stolen a couple years ago.
There's a great show about it. You should watch it. The Sticky, great show, very Canadian.
Right. It was very funny.
Americans don't understand how there's aspects of the Canadian economy, not to get into too much of digression, that are very bizarre to Americans, and it's these cabals of dairy farmers and maple syrup and telecoms that the economy is bizarre.
If you call it a cabal, you're not going to be let back in, Jeremy. Speaking of cabals, that's my transition to the Supreme Court of the United States. This week heard oral arguments about cannabis users or gun owners' ability to use cannabis. Or Marc, you're our resident lawyer. Were you paying attention to this? Is it just strange bedfellows that are fun to watch, or is there real implications here?
I wrote a musings about it.
Yeah.
It's an interesting case. I don't know that it really has that much impact for cannabis. But it is fascinating to sort of see how the support from what's traditionally a more right-leaning sort of constituency is supporting supportive in sort of an indirect way of what's traditionally a left-leaning constituency. I think that it's to me, I think this is all just it's good sort of in terms of just continuing to change the narrative about cannabis and making it, you read the back and forth, and none of the justices were we're trying to liken cannabis to mainlining heroin. It was, it was really more of there's a mention, I think, by Gorsuch or something. It may have been saying that, well, I think I'm paraphrasing, but gummies are legal in Colorado. And it's, and he says legal, and it's like, well, they are legal in Colorado, but you also didn't say, yeah, but they're illegal anyway. Otherwise, he didn't say that. And I think that, it's that kind of rhetoric, the way it's sort of changed in the minds of Americans, that, and some of the more conservative Americans, that I think that speaks a lot as to the progress this industry has made.
It's the coolest thing.
Still have a long way to go, but sorry.
It's the coolest thing Gorsuch has ever said in his entire life.
Right.
I would be remiss if I didn't mention it. I'm not a lawyer, so Marc, you can just totally correct me. Everything I say is probably about to be wrong, but Gorsuch and the conservative justices, I understand, have a very textualist approach, and there was this sort of digression where they're talking about what the definition of a habitual drunkard would have been under the first. The first iteration of the rule, and it was 8 shots of whiskey a day would not classify, and so I just thought that was a hilarious digression on the Supreme Court. So thereby the logic was that if 8 shots of whiskey wouldn't preclude someone from owning 8 shots of whiskey per day wouldn't preclude someone from owning a firearm, how could a gummy, every night to sleep do the same thing in the modern era? And so that was a pretty interesting discussion. I'd never heard anything like that debated on the Supreme Court before. And Gorsuch, maybe I don't agree with all his politics, but he explained it very well and it was very interesting to listen to.
Yeah.
That is another good segue, because there was a story in our newsletter this week, and regular news too, about a bill in Louisiana to have a pilot project for legalizing cannabis. And Louisiana, yes, Louisiana. Speaking of things you could do outside, you could drink certainly in the French Quarter as much as you want outside, as long as you're not holding glass. I think like there's some really weird rules, and certainly in New Orleans about drinking. I've certainly used cannabis in Louisiana, but it's a fairly conservative state. The politics are wacky to follow. I think that's probably part of it. But movement in southern states, whether this is movement or not, at least a bill is being introduced. Like, this seems to be sort of a trend, AnnaRae, that more conservative places are thinking about this. Is this because they already have THC beverages and there's sort of movement, or is it something else?
New Orleans has been a great market for THC beverage. Shout out to Eric Becker of Louis Louis. He's a friend of mine who makes a great beverage. It's very much born and bred from New Orleans. And I think that it's more about that they do have a very simple and restrictive but existing medical program. And once a state implements a medical program, very quickly it starts to be like, oh, okay, that wasn't so bad. The sky didn't fall, and they'll start getting inbound about the challenges of and the restrictiveness of a medical program, that more consumers want to be able to participate and access it. And certainly those businesses that are in the medical program also are frustrated by the lack of access to consumers and to the market. So I think that this bill is more just the natural progression of a market that has a medical program. I think what was a bigger surprise to me was the way that it was proposed, which was that the existing medical licensees would get exclusive access to an adult use market for, I think, 3 years. And if they had licensed a lot of operators, maybe I wouldn't have flinched so much, but Louisiana licensed very few operators. I think there's only 2 cultivators in the state, very, very few supply chain operators. So this type of offer to those folks is really a golden ticket if they can have a monopoly for a few years. So I bet they're excited.
And at least if they do legalize it like this, then Meghan McCain will never visit New Orleans. So that might be a benefit. That might push this over the edge. People might vote for that. I'm just kidding. I'm sure she's lovely. But probably not a great deal of fun.
Knows how to have a good time. They, I think, are ready for this. Yeah. And I mean, I have some friends that live there, and just watching all of their pictures and Mardi Gras, like there is so much intoxication in that city that I think that some cannabis is ready to just like take the temperature down a little bit and chill everyone out. Wouldn't necessarily be such a bad thing.
There way less spilt beer and vomit is my guess if there was more cannabis. And wait till she smells those 2 things, because it's terrible. I mean, so I think once again we see sort of the intersection both at the Supreme Court in Louisiana and in New York and California. The intersection of cannabis and politics is right there all the time. And I think we'll see more of it, not less of it, as sort of time goes on towards the midterms. Although there hasn't been any movement. We could do this. We could do a countdown clock for how many days there has not been movement on rescheduling since the president's December announcement. And anybody hearing anything other than false tweets from some people of the cannabis media?
There was somebody posted something on, I have no idea. There's no attribution to it, but somebody posted something on Reddit under weed stocks about a senior advisor to President Trump tells the president is very disappointed with Bondi's inaction on cannabis rescheduling.
Yeah.
But she blames it on the DEA. So but again, there's no attribution to it, like where this quote even came from. So
yeah, well, if that's true, maybe we'll see her get bounced, because tis the season. Kristi Noem, former governor of South Dakota, got bounced this week to some fake job. And just a quick note that she was against the voters in South Dakota on their legalization efforts. She always has been, and she hates cannabis almost as much as Meghan McCain.
It may be that unattributed quote may be why cannabis stocks are pretty much the only stocks that are in the green today. who knows? So
Yeah, I would be hesitant to follow unattributed quotes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but cannabis stock traders, they love unattributed quotes.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
They'll look for anything. So I love cannabis stock traders. Don't get me wrong, but they are volatile.
volatile bunch and volatile stocks both.
Yes.
Yes. Well, I want to thank you, AnnaRae, you, Jeremy, and you, Marc, for your time on this Friday show. This week in Cannabis Live, we'll be back next Friday, which I think is also Friday the 13th again. Is that right? Yikes. We got 2 back-to-back months with Friday the 13th.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. But we'll be okay. We're not superstitious.
I have the opposite superstition, and I think a Friday the 13th is good luck.
You also like possums. You're quite the contrarian.
My grandparents were set up on a blind date on Friday the 13th, and I wouldn't be here today if that hadn't happened. So.
Now we know. AnnaRae, just to go double back on something we talked about last week. Did you watch? Did you see Saturday Night Live with Rosenthal?
I didn't see it. I watched a clip or two. I didn't know. I didn't.
I'll send you all the clips. Okay.
Yeah, send me all the best clips. I'm not good at keeping up with live television.
Well, is anybody? Is there live television?
It's like
no one is. Yeah.
Yeah. If it was, then CBS, NBC, and ABC would be in much better shape. Thank you all for your time
here at This Week in Cannabis Live, because everyone's just watching.
Everybody. We probably have as many viewers as live.
Maybe Paramount will buy us.
What's that?
Maybe Paramount will buy us too.
We're open
the word with Ellison. Yeah.
Offers by end of day, please.
Any babies that want to buy us, we are here for it. All right, everybody. Thanks so much. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.